Hi, this is Scott Bradfield. This is the all shaggy version of reading great books in the bathtub. We're doing our third episode on one of my favorite novels, Vineland by Thomas Pynchon. It's The picture is a great picture. Get the old hardcover, don't get the new paperbacks. And it's a picture of obviously a place that's it's burning as we watch it, but at the same time, it's the burning down of all of this stuff that Pynchon loves. And he establishes this kind of fictional wilderness for us to escape into at the end of the book. Um, Vineland is the first book I loved about Pynchon and loved Pynchon for. Before this, I felt he was never writing about the world he knew. He was writing super clever books about World War II and Venice and mysterious figures that come and go. And I just didn't, have always found those books unpleasant to read. And when this came out, it's still my favorite book because it's the first time I thought this guy can really write about people, about the world we're in. He could do the material. He does the material reality of our lives mixed with our mental crap and our brains, all the cultural references that are kind of going in and out of our lives, and he does it better than anyone I can think of. It brings me to the topic of these classes, which is why we go to the bathtub in the first place. Why Virginia Woolf says you need the room of your own. And that is that when you read good writers and good books, you just need to shut out from the world. You can't get fiction if you're constantly busy with all the stuff you need to do and being distracted by all the stuff we're distracted by, such as the complete destruction of our country and our planet. And despite the fact that those are all incredibly important, that if we're going to enjoy books, we need to get away from all that crap for a few hours every day. And Pynchon is the real challenge for us because he really needs a lot of, particularly in these really great books, he needs a lot of attention. He doesn't need us to be making notes about the deconstruction of the Western metaphysics or the meaning of gender roles or anything. He needs us just to enjoy his characters and enjoy the streaming lives that they lead. And he has a great sense of narrative sweep. So he'll move from many characters, from one character to another, to a different time, particularly in Vineland, where he's going through these loops of time. Because for Pynchon, he's talking about how the 80s were kind of the destruction of all these 60s ideals, and he goes back to the Frenzy Gates and all the radical groups that she's hanging out with in the 60s, and then they're all co-opted and they're all bought up by Brock Vaughn and all these CIA, FBI clowns who are basically just trying to turn drugs into their weapon against this counterculture. So people who smoke grass or hang out or take acid or do whatever or sit around drinking wine all day, that kind of sense of indolence and that sense of apartness from the world we're in order to think about that world. You can't think about that world unless you get away from it. And these people are getting away from it, and maybe they're escaping it, and maybe they're actually reflecting on it. But what this escalating right-wing nutty crap from Nixon to Reagan, who no one thought would win, to George W. Bush, who no one thought would win, to Trump, who no one in their right mind thought would win. And then in the interstices, you have these totally sold out Democratic parties who just completely who split the difference with evil. They split the difference with evil every single chance they come into power. So you have this world trying to get away from it, and then when you're trying to read Pynchon, you need to get away from it, and it's not easy. So you need that time in the bathtub. You need to be able to focus for a while every single day. And it brings me to the fact that even when we have that time, some writers are just really hard to encapsulate. And this is a good example of one this is about as much, I think, as the average intelligence reader can kind of get without too much trouble. With a lot of trouble, with mainly a trouble of attention. So you don't need to sit down with your critical theory books, but you do need to pay attention to different characters. We do a lot of shifts in point of view. We do loops of time between 84 and the 60s, back and forth. And sometimes you're not sure exactly when you are or who you're with, and all these different characters moving around, because that is the world that Pynchon loves, that interconnectedness of all these different people, and watching how all these kind of beautiful things in the past are just sold out. At the same time as they're sold out, this kind of countercultural ragtag motley crew goes off into Vineland, into the Utopia of Vineland, which is a completely messed up, pot-ridden people living in trailers and basically having a life that means something to them. I want to read a couple of passages and again suggest that you really need to take your time with this book because it doesn't have a lot of characters. You need to enjoy it, and some of the later books may actually be a bit better. I was thinking today. I love Inherent Vice, and I think Bleeding Edge is an incredible book. And Pynchon in the later books actually doesn't go through the time shifts as much. And they're a little bit easier to get some of the complexity of his books because we don't go through all that narrative difficulty. And Vineland requires you to pay attention to all these various shifts. There's so many things in here. I want to look at something at 314. And in some ways, it was kind of belittled, I remember, when it came out, because he makes a big fuss about television and the boob, we called the boob tube in the 60s and the 70s. And he's talking about it as this universe of distraction, which is, of course, we know has just escalated into increasing in distraction. I mean, we're so distracted from the television that by our games and by our beeps and by our devices that are constantly alerting us to nothing but crap, just YouTube videos and Twitter feeds and just rubbish, that we don't even have time to get back to the television, which itself is just a distraction. So we have one layer of distraction on another. And he starts talking about how, at the bottom of page 313, he goes to see Mucho Mas. And the thing to remember in this, of course, some of these characters are going to come in and out of the other books. Mucho Mas is in I think, both Climbing Block 49 and Inherent Vice. Don't quote me on that. At one point, he says there's a scene here, and Mucho Mas is talking to Zoid, who's a musician at the time, and Mucho's a big record producer. And he says, I guess it's over. They're talking about the end of the revolution. We're on into a new world now. It's the Nixon years. Then it'll be the Reagan years. And Zoid says, oh, Reagan? No way he'll ever make president. That's what we said back in the 70s. Seriously, he's never going to be a president. So please go careful, Zoid, Rachel says, because soon they're going to be coming after everything. Not just drugs, but beer, cigarettes, sugar, salt, fat, you name it. Anything that could remotely please any of your senses, because they need to control all that. And they will. That is 1984 of Orwell's 1984. Anything that gives you pleasure, they have to get. They have to control that, because that is what makes you feel like you're part of your own body. You're part of your own world. You're not totally frightened by who's running the world. And they will. Fat police, Zoid asks. Perfume police. Tube police. Music police. Good, healthy shit police. Best to announce everything now. Get a head start. Well, I still wish it was back then when you were the Count. Remember how the acid was? Remember that window pane down in Laguna that time? God, I knew then. I knew. Window pane acid he's talking about. They had a look. Me too. That you were never going to die. Ha! No wonder the state panicked. How are they supposed to control a population that knows it'll never die? When that was always their last big chip, when they thought they had the power of life and death, but acid gave us the X-ray vision to see through that one. So, of course, they had to take it away from us. It's that belief that you have your own own truth and your own sense of life and you're going to live forever. That's the one thing that breaks this governmental obsession with controlling you, and why they send in all these cops and all these narcs to control the heads, as they call them. Yeah, but they can't take what happened, what we found out. Easy. They just let us forget. Give us too much to process. Fill up every minute. Keep us distracted. It's what the tube is for. And though it kills me to say it, it's what rock and roll is becoming. Just another way to claim our attention. So that beautiful certainty we had starts to fade. And after a while, they have us convinced all over again that we really are going to die. And they've got us again. It was the way people used to talk. That's the little narrative voice coming in there about it. It was the way people used to talk. Not anymore. That sense of forgetting, and the forgetting of this life that had been achieved in the 60s, is what the Thanatoids are about, this living dead population that sits around just watching television all day and humming the Gilligan's Island theme tune. And it is an incredible, again, as always, with Pynchon, very prescient. He understands the time, and he sees, it's almost like he sees what's coming afterwards. I'm not going to forget, Zoid vowed. Fuck them. While we had it, we really had some fun. And the fun is what this book is about. What the fun that they had and they have at the end of the book. And they never forgave us. Mucha went to the stereo and put on the best of Sam Cooke, volumes 1 and 2. And then they sat together and listened, both of them this time, to the sermon. One they knew and felt their hearts comforted by, though outside spread the lampless wastes, the unseen paybacks, the heartless power of the scabland garrison state, the green free America of their childhoods, even then was turning into. Now, these are very rhythmic, lovely sentences. And again, they're looping themselves as they move along. But if you can really catch on to them pretty quickly, even the first time through, and see the beauty of these sentences. They're waves. They're like little waves of experience. I wanted to go do a couple more. There's a wonderful little passage. Again, he's saying right there what we're trying to talk about, which is, they're going to make life so miserable, so difficult. You're going to be so worried about your money and all the debts you have and all these things you need to do and the fact that you don't have any control of your life. And they're going to use that just to keep you under control. And they're going to keep you distracted all the time. And they, quote unquote, know who they are. And we can see them. You can find them. It's not that hard to look for them, but they're thinking about it and they know what they're doing. So we have a nice little section here that's 320. And this is a nice little passage to read. I don't know if I'll read the whole thing. About the Thanatoids up in Vineland and how they all come up there. And all these old radicals like Weed Ottman have gone up into the woods to live. And it kind of makes a connection between them and the old 60s groups who used to come up there to have their summer holidays together. And they would all meet up in these big family holidays, and they would all bring all their trailers up. And there's a nice little passage here. There's many, many nice passages in the last 40 pages about Vineland. And I'm going to read a couple paragraphs to give you the sense of this kind of utopian community we're seeing here in the sweep of history. Page 320. And this is Claire, remember, Zoid's family, extended family. And she just says, "It was those Thanatoids, of course," said Claire. "They were just beginning to move into the county then, Vineland County. And if it scared her at all, being up there amid so much human unhappiness, why, she never mentioned it. Since the end of the war in Vietnam, the Thanatoid population had been growing steeply, so there was always day work at a Thanatoid village, a shopping and residential complex a few miles further into the hills above Shade Creek. Shape-ups were held in the pre-dawn down by the Vineland courthouse, shadowy brown buses idling in the dark, work and wages posted silently in the windows. Some morning Zoid had gone down, climbed on, ridden out with other newcomers, all cherry to the labor market up here. Former artists or spiritual pilgrims, now becoming choker setters, waiters and waitresses, baggers and checkout clerks, tree workers, truck drivers, and framers, or taking temporary swamping jobs like this, all in the service of others, the ones who did the building, selling, buying, and speculating. First thing new hires all found out was that their hair kept getting in the way of work. Some cut it short, some tied it back or slicked it behind their ears in a kind of question mark shape. Their once ethereal girlfriends were bussing dishes, or cocktail waitressing, or attending the muscles of weary loggers over at the Shangri-La Sauna, Vineland County's finest. Some chose to take the noon southbound back home. Others kept plugging on at night school or Vineland Community College or Humboldt State, or going to work for the various federal, state, county, church, and private charitable agencies that were the biggest employers up here next to the timber companies. Many would be the former tripping partners and old flames who came over the years to deal with each other this way, across desktops or through computer terminals, as if chosen in secret and sorted into opposing teams. So they all get disseminated out here into this world of kind of clandestine work and all this kind of junky jobs. But they find their home. They find a way somewhere outside of this world. Now, the last, I won't describe much more of this. There's one little passage I wanted to read. We have the evil Brock Vaughn is very rarely in the book. He's hardly ever in it, and it's perfect, because he doesn't become this super evil guy who comes in. You got to fight him. Everyone's imagining how they want to kill Brock Vaughn and end everything, but of course, Brock Vaughn is just another, minor figure in this huge machinery that's destroying the country and eventually the planet. I mean, again, that's what that picture is, right? That's just that total destruction. Then what's left? This little island that's left. It's a perfect image for the book. Brock Vaughn does come back. He finally actually makes his appearance as he disappears from the book in a really powerful little passage, which I urge you to get to. I wanted to look at one other thing here. 366. And this is a nice little picture. It's an image you get in earlier Pynchon books, which is the world being controlled by these figures out there, and you never quite get a hold of them. And they're kind of abstract ideas in the earlier books. But in this one, I really feel that we're getting closer, and particularly in these later novels, we're getting closer to these are figures in reality. They are not abstract, philosophical-like problems. They're genuine, real things that you could find. You can find them. 366. They're talking about what are we going to do about Weed Ottman, who is trying to come back to life. He's actually starting to hang out with Prairie, Zoid's daughter. Some really interesting passages there. And they're talking about Rex, who was the guy. Rex was Weed's brother, I think, who sells out the movement and brings Brock Vaughn into the communal groups. And they say, we should go after that Rex guy, the one who did it. And Weed says, Rex? Why? He's only the ceremonial trigger finger, just a stooge, same as Farnese. Used to think I was climbing step by step, right, toward a resolution. First Rex, above him, your mother. Then Brock Vaughn, but that's when it begins to go dark. And that door at the top I thought I saw isn't there anymore, because the light behind it just went off too. So Weed's talking about that issue, that problem of the 60s where they thought, well, we're finally getting to the top of the staircase or this little power structure. And as you're reaching up, every time you see somebody, you think you're going to get past them. And then just as you're about to reach it, all the lights go out. And that's what happens to Weed. All the lights go out for him. But he's trying to reconnoiter. And again, the other issue to remember in this is Pynchon's talking about paranoia is often linked to Pynchon. Again, it's an abstract issue. And this is the book which makes it very clear. It's about when the cops and the CIA and the FBI and all these machinery of control starts getting into people's communities, that they start to drive those people apart. And they drive them apart every way they can. And eventually technology, people are driving themselves apart. And that is what releases this paranoia that's always running through Pynchon's books. And in this book, it's quite clear where it's from. I wanted to close one last passage, because this is one thing that's very unusual in Pynchon. Usually he makes up all his own authorities. He makes up all his characters. He very rarely mentions historical figures, real historical figures. Ronald Reagan comes through this is very repeatedly and justifiably noted in the book. But normally he creates his own political figures, his own cultural figures, and he rarely quotes people unless they're occasionally in a countercultural reference. He very rarely quotes people who are kind of significant literary figures, as I recall. And he quotes here, one of the few times I've ever seen him do this, he quotes Emerson. And for Pynchon to quote a kind of a literary icon or a literary, one of those people you're supposed to quote, is surprising. But it's a good quote, and it's a good way to close on Vineland. And this is from Emerson. And Emerson says, secret retributions are always restoring the level, when disturbed, of the divine justice. It is impossible to tilt the beam. All the tyrants and proprietors and monopolists of the world in vain set their shoulders to heave the bar. settles forevermore the ponderous equator to its line, and man and mote and star and sun must range to it or be pulverized by the recoil. And these characters are all trying to avoid being pulverized by the recoil and believing in a justice, some justice that can be attained even over this system of complete evil, which we look at every day through our newspapers, if you're reading the newspapers. And that is all they can hope for. And there's a lovely part where Prairie says, one of the things about my parents I'll always remember is they always made me believe there was a higher justice. Even Zoid, the hippie crazy guy, and she says that belief was what kind of helped her, and that's basically what it seems that Emerson's talking about here, and it's certainly what Vineland's about. So the trick is, of course, to save that little bit that's left before it's burned up too. Wonderful book. Go read Late Pynchon. Don't waste your time with Gravity's Rainbow. And I'll see you next week. The next couple of weeks, we'll try to do some very simple. I need something really ridiculous, something that's very simple and fun, and I can read in the bathtub in maybe 1 hour. Okay, we'll see you next week.